What is it about sacrifice in the Bible in particular that you think is different or truer?
I think the depth of analysis of sacrifice is unsurpassed. So the entire biblical text, Old and New Testament, is an elaboration of forms of upward striving sacrifice. And the way that the key principles of sacrifice are elucidated is by juxtaposition of a variety of different sacrificial narratives. And you might say, well, why are you obsessed with the idea of sacrifice? And the reason for that is that society itself, there's a limited number of principles upon which society might be predicated. You could imagine that you could take a Freudian view, let's say, and that you could make the case that we're basically biological machines driven by the vagaries of our ids, right? And so we're a collection of primordial, evolutionarily determined drives, or you could even think about them as personalities, which is more sophisticated. So for Freud, for example, the dominant uniting force was sex, and even society itself was a consequence of the sublimation of the reproductive instinct. And sex is a perfectly reasonable principle to elevate to the highest place. Richard Dawkins essentially does that with his insistence on the selfish gene, is that, and you can see how that fits with an evolutionary account of the emergence of human beings. Society is predicated on sex. And then you could branch that out. You could say, well, it's not just sex. There's a variety of hedonistic impulses, right? But they're basically needs or wants, avoidance of pain, pursuit of pleasure. That's a Freudian perspective as well. As biological organisms, our fundamental motivating force is hedonistic.
But don't you think an evolutionary psychologist could give a comprehensively reductive account of patterns of sacrificial behavior in human development? I mean, couldn't there be some just so story as to why a man throws himself on a grenade to save the life of his friends?
Oh, there have been accounts of that sort.
It gets complicated. You get a strictly Darwinian analysis of that does get complicated.
I would sacrifice myself for 2 brothers or 4 cousins.
Right.
That's Robert Trivers.
And there's a kind of obviously the Girardian analysis of the sort of the mimetic desire and scapegoating mechanisms and so on. But what's striking, and this is something, I think a conversation that came up in our gospel seminars, I think on the last day when we were going through, looking at Golgotha and those extraordinary, heartbreaking kind of final moments of the climax of the Gospels in some ways, or there's just before the end. And what was striking there is that we decided, yes, this is sacrifice, but Girard was onto something. I can't remember if we discussed Girard, that this is a sacrifice to end all sacrifices. In other words, the message of the New Testament is that sort of evolutionary analysis, as it were, is kind of breaks, comes to a halt, is culminated, is sort of finds a sort of a stopping point, a stopping point, beyond which there will be evolutionary analyses of human behavior will, in at least in Christian contexts or in cultures that have broadly accepted the Christian moral framework, and sacrifice is not going to be necessary anymore. It's not going to fulfill the mechanism.
Or at least its nature won't transform.
Right. And there may be something here to the idea that in a sort of post-Christian moral culture, that logic gets removed, and then we start to see the scapegoating returning, which is something that we might have, I think, identified in different ways in the cultural revolution that's broken across the institutional landscape of the West in the last 10 to 15 years. And I think there's a plausible view to be developed along those lines.
Well, we talked about the potential driving forces of civilization.
Yes.
So let's think of civilization as society. So if it's me alone, that's not a civilization. The minimum unit for the dawn of civilization would be interaction between 2 people. Okay, so then what's the nature of interaction between 2 people? Well, it's sacrifice. And the reason for that is that if I want to establish a relationship with you, even in the moment, but especially one that continues voluntarily and continues to develop upward, then that relationship has a pattern. And the pattern is one of sacrifice. In the simplest possible form, that would be the establishment of a a game between two children. And the game is predicated on taking turns. First you, then me. Well, the fact that sometimes it's you is a sacrificial offering on my part. I'm offering my primacy. I'm sacrificing my primacy for the sake of the relationship. Well, so we sacrifice to other people to invite them into our circle. But that's not where the sacrificial process stops, because as we become wiser and mature, we sacrifice the present to the future. That's almost a definition of maturity, right? That's the ability to forego gratification and the ability to regulate hedonistic whim in keeping with its iterated consequences out into an indefinable future. Now, how far should that future extend? Well, the future that Abraham contemplates is infinitely multi-generational, for example. Like God offers Abraham the opportunity to become the father of untold nations for an indefinite amount of time. And the reason for that is Abraham establishes a sacrificial pattern of adventure that optimizes, you could say, optimizes the probability of survival across the longest possible period of time. So you sacrifice to the other in a relationship, you sacrifice the present to the future. When you're attending to the world, you sacrifice as well, because when you attend to any one thing, which you have to do to attend, you prioritize it, you put it at the pinnacle, then everything else that isn't that is sacrificed. And that's already a kind of implicit monotheism in every perceptual act.
But I wonder whether we're equivocating a bit here in how we understand sacrifice. I mean, the sort of classical or anthropological way of thinking about it is, I don't know, I mean, I haven't done a lot of work on this or a lot of reading about it, but my sense is that it's a mechanism to contain violence within a society, to channel it, to channel the violence.
Well, that's the Girardian view.
Well, yes, but you could also look, you don't have to take the mimetic desire approach.
Well, it is a way of containing aggression. Because,
no, so I'm not denying that. I'm saying that that's probably the sort of standard, my kind of textbook way of thinking about it in terms of, at scale. But you're introducing something, a slightly different perspective. You're saying
it's wider perspective.
Sacrifice is something, it's more like self-giving or a sort of self-constraint as a part of recognition
it's an upward offering.
Of the other.
Well,
but you see them as those two senses as broadly continuous?
Yes. Well, look, with regards to the control of aggression, let's say, children can play or fight. If they play, they don't have to fight. The play is sacrificial. If it's play, it's, for example, if a little boy asks a little girl to play, he'll say, do you want to play house or car, let's say? Okay, well, that's a very particular kind of statement. First of all, it involves want, right? Is this something you would voluntarily engage in? Otherwise, it's not play. And then she has to have a choice of the game. Okay, now the game sets a frame, right? And it's a frame of mutual interaction. Now, as long as the alignment of the players within the game is maintained, there's no reason for aggression. That's not sublimation or inhibition of aggression. That would be more like a Freudian model or a model of Rousseau or Hobbes, that aggression is inhibited by socialization. That's certainly a Rousseauian perspective. It's inhibited. It's clamped down on, and we need to be free. It's like, that's not right at all. If we establish the proper frame of play, aggression is now subdued. It's because we could for example, we could set up an extremely competitive and even near violent game, right? It could be intensely competitive. Well, that means the aggression is integrated. It's not even sublimated, it's integrated because it's put in its proper place. Now, the sacrificial element in that is that, well, it's not about me, not all the time. There's at least reciprocity in it. And so you could imagine that the hallmarks of civilization are twofold. The fundamental hallmarks is, one would be, I sacrifice the present to the future. And then the next would be, I sacrifice my own subjugation to my immediate whims to the benefits of social being at multiple levels simultaneously. So I have a wife, I have friends, I have children. Now that's all sacrificial because it's not about me, but the gain is long-term and productive and expansive, but that's the nature of civilization.